really interesting because so much of our foundation, like this East Coast has so much dominance that it really, when it gets to General Assembly time, it becomes quite apparent that there is a disconnect. Like, we always think of a northern and southern racism issue or difference of beliefs, and really and truly, it's an east-west divide than it more is a northern and southern, even though we'll get here in a little bit and we'll talk about the northern and southern churches reuniting. So that's kind of our model, and it was a little bit easier to see the map, and I wasn't sure where to put it in the talk or in the slideshow. But everybody cool on the model? So the big thing within the Pcusa, just like anything else, is lingo. There are, like, even this morning, like we said PNC instead of the the pastor nominating committee. If you were brand new today, you would have no idea what PNC is. And so that's where we get ourselves in our own trouble, because we have all this insider language and all of this insider lingo. And so for those that need a little refresher on lingo, this is kind of where we are. Most of us, I think, in the room are familiar with deacon, ruling elder, and then elder/minister of word and sacrament. I forgot to make that smaller. But, and it's teaching elder. So it's teaching elder and minister of word and sacrament. These are your kind of your three elected pieces. As we know, the deacons are kind of the runners, the ones that, are doing a lot of the pastoral care, special lifting. That's kind of where your deacons fall under. And as y'all know, typically you're ran by, like, your associate pastor is kind of run by that. The senior minister typically works with deacons, but not necessarily all that much. And it's more because of the roles that person falls into that you have there. So ruling elder is what we call a person on session. They are elected to that with what you saw with the congregational meeting, same with the deacon. And so these are our kind of two, this is where the book of order, which I don't have because mine's online, or mine's on my Kindle, states in, oh my gosh, who were the people that came? Jan and Paul. Jan and Paul, drove home really, really importantly that the session and the deacons are kind of the spiritual motivators for the church. Because as we know, pastors come and go, but like people stay forever. And so that's kind of that's where things have gotten a little twisted and a little flipped, is because the pastor wants to be the person calling the shots, doing all those things, and that's not really how we're supposed to be governed. There's to do the will and the testament of what session says. And so that's kind of where, like, not picking on who we've had in the past or anything like that, just kind of a broad stroke. That's where a lot of churches get into troubles, whenever they give the pastor too much power in that regard, or the pastor tries to control what session is doing, even though it's not really at the heart of what they want it to be. So that's why these two positions are so important and so needed within that. And that's where I love the Presbyterian model, because again, when you go to General Assembly or when you go to Presbyterian meetings, you can send as many, we send the same amount as ruling elders and teaching elders, because of that need of that voice and how different and distinct each of those parties are. And so those are kind of our big three that we have. And again, it's teaching elder, and then they got changed to MWS, which stands for Minister of Word and Sacrament. Why they did that, someone explained to me a long time ago. I just still think it's foolish. Call them teaching elders or pastors, but Presbyterians, they like to be fun. So, any questions on those three words? Lingo. All right, so, yeah.
What you've covered so far, does that also apply to PCA?
Yeah, for the most part, this will fall under any, like, eco would fall in this, any Presbyterian model for the most part. Like, I know the pastor at Colonial was not a PCUSA pastor, so there is a little bit difference of how they do their call process than what we do in the PCUSA, and so they're given that, but they're so small as a denomination that they have to do that. And so at some point, maybe the Pcusa. So like within the Pcusa church, we can call an ELCA pastor, we can call a UCC pastor, we can call a Pcusa pastor. ELCA is, I'm doing it myself. Some word with Evangelical Lutheran Church Association, something like that. If you're familiar with Nadia Bolz-Weber, she's a writer, she's ELCA. The church right down the street is ELCA. So if that pastor wanted to come down, we could entertain, because it's what's called in communion, because we all follow the same governance model. We couldn't call a Catholic, United Methodist, Southern Baptist, or non-denom because they don't fall under the governance way of explaining it and how that model is. And so we are in communion with, disciples of Christ would fall in there. And so those are four that pastors can jump back and forth between those denominations if they wanted. Also, the pastor nominating committee would have to be willing to take all of those denominations as well. And sometimes it's a really good marriage. There's friends of mine, some churches in small towns that have kind of joined together. You see that a lot. Like there was one church on the other side of Louisville that's a United Methodist Presbyterian church. And you're just like, that's two different types of governorships. And so the conference of the United Methodist Church and the Presbytery had to get together and make sure that that was fine for that church. And most of the time, because of resources, money, that happens. So yes, so within that Presbyterian model, as long as the pastor understands that governance, you could do that. So Colonial, even though they probably fall under the Presbyterian model, because their denomination is so small, they have to go get whoever they want to go get. And then it's up to them, to that person, to understand how they are governed. Because then Colonial still has to answer to their General Assembly or Presbytery, whatever that is. But whenever you're large and you have a lot of money, you can do whatever you want. You can kind of call the shots. And that's kind of what Colonial is a little bit. Not beating them up, just the truth of how it goes. So we are governed by two books. This is what we call polity, or our law. The one on the left, right? Is that y'all's left? Yeah. One on the left is the Book of Order. That comes out every 2 years after a General Assembly, and so it gets updated constantly, but most of the time it's not massive updates. The biggest one, I think, was 1989, which was a really big update, but for the most part, it's just clarification of languages and different things that kind of get added to it. 2012 was another big one that we'll talk about because of how the Book of Order is laid out, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. The Book of Confessions, this is a really, really great book. It has everything that we somewhat believe in, which is, and I say that because there's some language in here that is still not very affirming, or it's still masculine-led, and our denomination is trying to get into like a non-gender space. And so there's still a lot. So there's some people, this is a highly contested book, but it's really, really good. It's really, really rich in history, and we'll talk about that in a second. But these are the two books that kind of stand side by side with each other. Think of it almost like the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, I guess, or whatever you would want to kind of call that. That also brings me to another point. The Presbyterian Church started, or the United States government is based off the Presbyterian model, which is really, really cool. So that's why you have the shared leadership, deacon, elder, teaching elder. You have 3 branches of houses. You have people kind of voting, sending representatives, all that kind of in-stake. So whenever you look at the United States government, it is all based off the Presbyterian model and how it kind of goes, which I thought was really, really cool whenever I learned about it. So the Book of Order. The Book of Order is a lot of legal language, but it also gives churches the flexibility to do what's best for them. And so the big thing that I believe in and that I think is important to remember is that the church reformed is always to be reformed according to the Word of God. So one of the big things that we're taught in seminary is that we are reforming and always reformed. And so that whenever we learn something new about ourselves, about God, about who we are collectively, that there is a reforming that happens. And so that's where we can get into debates all day about women in ministry, women preaching, because you have these few texts, but then you have these other texts that kind of support that. So which one do you take? Homosexuality, which was the big one that we went through last year. You have these texts that you could hold up, and then you have these other texts that you can kind of hold up together. And so that's kind of the reformed part, is that we are always reforming, that we don't have to stay in a space, in a place, because we said it in 1950, that we can kind of grow with each other, or yesterday, like that we can be something new tomorrow than we are today. And so that to me is one of the beautiful things about the Book of Order, that it makes very, very clear right at the beginning that this is something that is worked upon, that there are some foundational beliefs. That's that F part, because it's done in sections. Like if you ever did like law, you have like different dashes, so there's like F1.012 that you kind of go with. And so foundations is that part of what do we as a denomination, what are we unequivocally, whatever that word is, going to base ourselves into. So that's the shortest of all the sections, but it kind of establishes what a Peace USA church is, who do we serve, why do we gather, all of these different kind of things, which some beautiful, beautiful language found in the foundations part. Then you have the government, and that's kind of what we talked about with the session, the deacons, presbytery, and it gives each one of those roles its own purpose and own statement. And so you can find the Book of Order online. It's just a PDF. I would highly recommend finding the 2023 to 2025, but after General Assembly in June, we will have like the beginnings of a new Book of Order, because it'll be 2025 to 2027, because that's how long the people that are elected serve, kind of as well. So that's what we have, I believe. I may be wrong on that. It may be a one-year piece, but I'll find out and I'll let you know. So also within the government, the biggest thing within the Book of Order is the word shall. The shall is the most important word that you would find in the Book of Order, because that means there is no compromise. You have to do what it says. So any law that you are reading, if it doesn't have shall in it, you can do whatever you want. You can interpret it in a way that is fitting for your church. But if it has shall, which doesn't happen that often, I think it's like less than 100 times, then you have to abide by it. So like whenever I was going through the ordination process, a lot of shalls in that ordination process, because they want to make sure that they get the right minded person to be in ministry, which I find to be an oxymoron. So that's kind of where government kind of goes. The same with worship, does the same thing there with like how a funeral should be done, how what needs to happen within the sacraments, what needs to happen during an ordination service, what needs to happen in an installation service, because those are two different things, because you're ordained kind of one time, but then you're installed in each of your churches that you serve. So when our pastor nominating committee put a 5 to 10 year requirement, which wasn't, which isn't a hard press requirement, that person more than likely will just be installed here because they've already been ordained previously. So that's just whenever you see that language. And so worship kind of helps you dictate a little bit of how that kind of goes and where that kind of leads. And so any questions within there. So worship is one that probably has the least amount of shalls in its section because of how much flexibility and wideness we have within our worship service. And then the last one that's not like, it's a good one, but it's a tough one, is discipline. And so there are different councils that can happen whenever a church steps out of line, but also whenever a pastor or staff member steps out of line, like that, that the discipline actions come in. And the biggest thing that it teaches there is that kind of grace abounds. That's the biggest thing that really I like within the discipline compared to the United Methodist Church, which they have a different polity. They're not called the Book of Order, it's called the Book of Discipline. And that one is very more rigid, I would say, than our discipline. You have different councils that could happen in different kinds of discipline that would take place depending on the aggrievement. So if it's misconduct towards other staff members, that's a different kind of judiciary council than like if a pastor's stealing money or a church member stealing money or a church that buys property. That was like one of the big ones that we had to face in Dayton, Ohio, was that this church just started buying up property all around them. And they couldn't because, as we know here, like the presbytery owns the land and somewhat of the building. And so they were doing things, and that was, if you want a fun presbytery meeting, have a church that starts buying property. Because those people did not care, and it was awesome. And it was just wild to see. I was like, where are we right now? So anyway, so you just kind of, all disciplines require different councils, different mediation and things like that. And so it's not a bad thing if it happens, because again, at the heart of it is grace and making sure that the person is heard and understood and different things like that. And so I really like the way that the Pcusa handles those kind of issues as they come up. Any questions about the Book of Order? Again, it's PDF. I didn't know how many slides to do on the Book of Order because it breaks down. But again, if anything that you read in the Book of Order that I would highly recommend is the foundations piece. It is just beautifully written, and I really like what a lot of it has to say, especially in like the call, like whenever you have someone that wants to go into ministry, just the affirmation that is there that I felt that I didn't feel whenever I was United Methodist. And so just kind of a prop to that. All right, so here's that Presbyterian model. We have 9,041 churches. That's a wrong number. It's right around 8,200. We lose about 1% of our churches every year. And so we lose that along with and then the membership is declining as well. So right now we're 1.3 million. That's probably closer to 1.1, 1.2. And we lose members every single year. We can spend hours talking about why the church is declining and everything that kind of goes onto it. But what I love is that God, I think that there's going to be a reformation happening because God is still calling people into ministry. If churches were to close, right, and like that's everyone's fear of coming, God would stop calling people. Like I feel like that wholeheartedly, that if the churches were going to decline into zero, into the ground, I just don't think that would be the case if God were still calling people. So that's kind of where I land in the world of optimism and how that kind of goes. But that number is declining. And so we are not alone in kind of that piece. So as we said, the Synod is Mid-America, and the presbytery that we belong to is Heartland. And we're right around 1,200 churches, I think, or I may have written that one down wrong, and then 213,000 members. Did I write that down right? Yeah. So we're 1,200 churches in our Presbyterian, or in our Synod, and as you can tell, we're all of Missouri and then all of Kansas. And so that's kind of who we are and how that kind of goes. So we are that small little nugget right there. That's Heartland. And so as you can kind of see with northern Kansas and southern Kansas, you have just as many churches, if not fewer, in that area than you do with us in just kind of that little sliver of Missouri on up. So it's pretty interesting. If you want to get into that, this is what I really like talking about, is different presbyteries, how they're run, how they're governed. I've lived in, I think, 5 or 6 presbyteries, and so each of them are different. Each of them have their own strengths and weaknesses. I will easily say Heartland is the best presbytery I've lived in, bar none. Our camp is the best in the ones I've lived in. And I've lived in Atlanta, Indiana, which is Whitewater, Shepherds and Lapsley, which is in Alabama, Louisville, which, and that's where our headquarters is in Louisville. I think we're better than them. And then where do we go after that? Then we're in Ohio, in the Miami Valley, and now here. We easily, in my opinion, trounce everything that they are with ability to gather, ability to breathe life into clergy, but also into our elders and different things like that. And so I think Gail does a fantastic job of communicating and trying to be a part of that, because not every executive presbyter, and that name changes in every presbytery, but I think he really, really, really is trying his best and wants us to succeed, and that's not always the case with executive presbyters, especially some of them I've worked with. They are just cold, jaded, and not really willing to lift up the spirit. So that's so each of these synods and presbyteries, they each have their own executive presbyter and different things like that. And so we can continue to talk about this. Puerto Rico is on here, which is a really, really cool little spot that we have, and they have 3 presbyteries and 1 synod. So I think that's pretty neat. Whenever we talk about the Pcusa, it is only the United Methodist Church, United States and Puerto Rico as our representative, even though there are other territories and different things like that that the United States has for some reason. And I could give my friend Hasiel to talk about it, but the Pcusa just really, really did well in Puerto Rico. And so there are mission trips that if we wanted to do, and we could learn all about that, or maybe that's how I'll sell it, is if we want to go to Puerto Rico and learn about the Pcusa's involvement, let's go. So anyway, so that's kind of that map. Any questions about the synods and presbytery map that we have going on? Some of these have absorbed into each other. Some of these are struggling. Some of them are better than others, as I've said. And so it just kind of depends on where you are. But anyway, so I think it's a really cool map and a really cool layout of everything we have kind of going on. So the Book of Confessions, that's this book right here. This is the study version. If you ever get a copy of the Book of Confessions, I would highly recommend this copy, because each confession has about, 5 or 6 page intro. Like, it's built for a Sunday school class. It's built for seminary students all across the board. And so we have 12 confessions in it, and it starts in 325 and goes all the way up to 1986. And so some of them that you know is the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed. But what's some other cool ones in here is you have the Scots Confession, the Heidelberg Catechism, the Second Helvetic Confession, the Westminster Standards, and then the ones that kind of are within our lifetime, or ones that are important, is the Theological Declaration of Barmen. That is kind of this anti-Nazi claim. And so as World War II was ending, you have kind of the Declaration of Barmen happening, that is our standards and our confession of what the atrocities that were placed and how what we stand and believe. The same with the Confession of 1967. That's kind of a civil rights piece that kind of got put in there, and so we've had that a few times. And then the last one is the Confession of Belhar, which is a response to the apartheid in South Africa. And that's your last one. That's the 1986 version. It was really cool whenever Fred gave me his Book of Confession. It didn't include the Confession of Belhar, which I just thought was really, really neat. And there are probably other ones that exist with, the older you get and the books that are there. So there are some that probably don't have a confession of 1967, and then the Declaration of Barmen as well. So that's what's really, really neat about the Book of Confessions and how that kind of goes. So any questions about the Book of Confessions? I'm trying to see my notes. And if you want, I have an outline that I'm not really going over, but I can give you. Yeah. So there are other people that adopt the Book of Confessions. This is our polity, and so some people won't move it as far as their polity, as their governing, kind of document that we will. But there are other denominations that use this. But for the Book of, like the Catholics have a book of confession, the Lutherans have a book of confession. This is ours, the way that it's made up with these 12. And so there are some that have more confessions and less confessions.
But I'm talking about that particular one.
This is PCUSA.
Worldwide?
PCUSA nationwide. And so, yeah, so PCA would not, there's some, I can't remember which one it is, but they don't have that confession in there. But the majority of them would be, especially the Scots confession, like where our history that we'll kind of get into matches before we start splitting, they would carry that. So they would carry the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, the Heidelberg Confession, the Scots Confession. But once we start splitting around 1967 and before, that's when they would not include those confessions, or if they did, they would include a different confession that was probably in that same year. But these were the ones that were, those confessions, especially Barman, those are all adopted at General Assemblies. And so, so that's where that kind of piece goes. So yeah, so PCUSA, Nationwide Book of Confessions, this is us. Great question. Any other questions?
I'm looking at the PDF.
Yeah.
It says part 1, is there a part 2?
So part 1 is the Book of Order. Part 2 is the Book of Confessions. Or I may have that flipped. But yeah, so that's where it's part 1, part 2. So we have 2 of those. But there's not two different documents, but Book of Order, Book of Confession. Steve, I had that same exact question in seminary. I was like, I'm missing something, and I didn't want to fail the test. I was so terrified of failing polity. So, no, that one I know real, real well. And everyone's looking at me, because everyone in the class was like cradle Presbyterians. You get like the, what? What are you talking about? I was like, I went through a different kind of confirmation. Anyways. All right, so here's some other PCUSA terms, some that we probably don't use that often around here. And so that's where hopefully we'll have something kind of new. So Matthew 25, a church agrees to live into a standards of the Matthew 25. And so you can find more information about it there. I don't know how many in our presbytery are Matthew 25, but most of the time whenever you go on their website, they'll have some kind of, they'll have this, what is this called, logo on it. So I know Grace Covenant and I know Village are 2 Matthew 25s. Yes?
So, why, who determined what the criteria was for the Matthew 25? The Presbytery,
General Assembly.
General Assembly
Mm-hmm.
determined that.
Yeah.
And it's like, as far as I'm concerned, a bunch of hoops you have to jump
Yes.
through, because it has nothing to do with the pure scripture. of
Correct.
Matthew 25.
Correct. I would say it's the spirit of what is being determined, and so kind of what Candace is alluding to. I got to find my notes because I've never been a part of a Matthew 25 church, but people that are in a Matthew 25 church will tell you that they're a Matthew 25 church, if that makes any sense. And so it's something very, very important to be a part of. But it's 3 things. One is racism, that you make a stand and like a declaration against fundamental racism and trying to change that. Ecumenical living of some sort, and then there's 3 parts. There's the blue part, the green part, and the orange part, and I apologize that I don't, and I thought I had it written down in my notes, but that's kind of what the Matthew 25 is. And so you don't really sign up to be one. You kind of make your case for being a Matthew 25, and then you have to stay in that rigorous side. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Don't get me wrong, Matthew 25, but it's something that certain churches strive for, while it's not really a requirement or any of that. It's just that that's what their church is really, really focused on. So it's a lot of social justice issues are Matthew 25. The church I came from in Dayton, Ohio, really, really tried to do this, and I thought we were going to become a Matthew 25 church, but it was not, like, we weren't anywhere near the target. And so that was really, really deflating to the committee that was trying to be a Matthew 25 church, and then it just fizzled. And so you need a lot.
Don't you think by setting things up like this, it almost is creating a class system within
I can see how you can draw that conclusion. I think that it's a response to a nationwide change that to give the churches that opportunity that really, really, really wanted something. And I don't think, like, for me, I don't think you need to call yourself a Matthew 25 church to do the work of Matthew 25. And so that's where I feel like. That's where I'm going, Terry.
Well, last year when I was going through the transition, stopped, the first conversation I went to the website for the church, then went to the Hartford Presbytery, and the Matthew 25 started showing up at the list of churches that were
Part of it.
considered part of it.
Yeah.
And the first conversation I had with Dave was, okay, are we behind because we're not a
No.
Matthew 25 church? He said, oh, no, no, no.
Yeah.
He was very straightforward. This
Right.
is not something that you need to strive for.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, I think Matthew 25 churches, where the Peace USA struggles mightily is in urban settings. And I think this gave those people, because again, we're all Presbyterians, and so like we need some kind of order and rule set and following. And I think urban churches felt isolated and alone in their needs and what they needed to provide that like Presbytery couldn't, because they were catering more towards the suburban churches. And so this kind of, I believe, grew out of that wanting and need. But it is somewhat, they do try to separate themselves. So like when you go to General Assembly or you go to these different gatherings, they'll have Matthew 25 gatherings, things like that. And that's like one of the very few things that you have to have like an ID to get in the door. You gotta have a pin to get in the door, which gives that like elitism, kind of piece. But it's also just churches with a different mindset in a different community in which they're in. And so I think that allows for that to happen, because Peace USA is predominantly white. We know this. But some of our churches are not in white areas, and so Matthew 25, I think, helps those churches that are all white with white staff, but their community is culturally different, Black, Hispanic, whatever, and allows them to get the education that they need for what is around them, that I think Matthew 25 helps solve. So that's Matthew 25. I would highly recommend looking it up, kind of going through it. But again, I don't think it's a gold standard or anything like that. I think it just helps those churches with that mindset. So this is Triennium. Triennium is what some of you heard me talk about before, because our students, the Thole girls, Caleb and Sherman and Aaron Thole, will all be going to Triennium. It used to be held at Purdue University. It was only for youth. It would happen every 3 years. And at its heyday, it was about 6,000 to 8,000 youth would gather at Purdue University. And this went on for decades. And it's a fantastic, fantastic piece. I don't know why the photo is doing that. Like, those kids aren't that shape. But it used to be at Purdue University. And because of ADA and some other issues, they've now moved it to Louisville. And so it'll be at the headquarters and just kind of in that surrounding area, which will be different. There's going to be, I'm already expecting to hear how when it was at Purdue University, it was so much better. But because of COVID, they were going to do it in Indianapolis, but because of COVID, they had to shut that down because people weren't safe or didn't want to send students. So the number is going to fall dramatically than what it has been in the past. But it's really, really, I think, one of the coolest things that we do as a denomination, especially pouring into the life, because you have to be in senior high, you have to be going into the 9th grade and also 12th. But because of, again, this goes back to that reforming and always reforming, because there were 6 years of high school students that weren't able to go, they've really, really poured into a young adults kind of piece. And so even though we're not taking any young adults from our church, college students, young adults, we are as a Presbyterian. So I'm really, really excited to see what they're going to do at Triennium. And this is kind of what part of our apportionments pays for and different things like that, which is fun within Triennium. So I'm really excited to see what it looks like this year in Louisville, and also like the students to see the headquarters and a little bit of the seminary that's there in Louisville. I'm not sure yet how far we're going to get into that. So that's Triennium. That's just kind of my own little shtick there. We have 3 kind of nationwide camps. Montreat, which you guys have heard of me, that's in the top left with the hills. That's Assembly Inn. Hopefully, it's a year-round camp, and so there's a college also on the camp. This is in Montreat, North Carolina, about 20 miles east of Asheville. And so there's a college also called Montreat College, but the college and the camp and conference center split ways somewhere, I think, in the 90s. And so we would say probably it's more PCA, which is what the college is, and then we have the camp and conference center. And so they do things year-round. They do things for men's ministry, women's ministry. Churches can do kind of their yearly getaway there as well. And so it's a beautiful, wonderful place, and I can talk about that all day. Ghost Ranch is in, I don't know how to say it, Pcusa, New Mexico. And I haven't been there yet, but a lot of people love it. It's 21,000 acre property in the high desert. It was formerly the home of the artist Georgia O'Keeffe, if you're familiar with her work. And so this one is a definitely more nature retreat, very impactful on the social justice side of things, being right there with the Mexico border, not too far away, and offers a lot of art and spirituality piece. And so that's Ghost Ranch there. And then the one in the middle is Massanetta, and that's in Harrisonburg, Virginia, or James Madison University. And their kind of claim to fame is their middle school conference, which is really, really cool. So they have very few adults that lead that conference, and it's all high school students that are leading it. And so you can't really tell by the picture because I try to throw all 3 in there. But that's kind of their worship space sanctuary. So that's Massanetta. Hopefully in the next few years we'll send some middle schoolers there, because I think that's really, really cool. Got to work with them a few times. And so those are kind of the big 3 whenever people talk. There's Stony Brook, which is up in New York, that some people use. Heartland is probably one of the bigger ones that people use, but it's not one that holds these national kind of gatherings like Ghost Ranch, Massanetta, and Montreat do. So those are kind of our big 3 camps that we have. And again, it goes back to, you see that East Coast dominance. One's in Virginia and one's in North Carolina, and you have one out in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico. Not in the middle of nowhere, but so anyway, so that's where you kind of see that East Coast dominance side of things. But anyways, 3 great places. Hopefully we can get some people there throughout the years, but that's kind of where we are. One of the cool things that I'm hoping to have one of our students in the future join is called the Young Adult Volunteers, or YAVs. And so this is one of our special offerings, goes to the Young Adult Volunteers, the YAV ministry. Anna, who some of y'all know, she was a YAV in Northern Ireland, and we have them all over the world. And anyone that is 21 to 30, or it's 18 to 30, I think now, can go, and we have national sites and we have international sites. Our spring break trip in 2026, we'll be hopefully working with the YAVs wherever we go, Nashville, Denver, or St. Paul. So each city, big cities kind of have them, some smaller cities have them as well. And we don't have any in Kansas City, but hopefully one day that'll change. But there's a lot of things that need to provide. You need to provide housing, you need to provide a person that's the site coordinator, and different things like that. So I would imagine that there was at one point, but they can dissolve, kind of through it. So if you have someone that's looking for like a gap year in college or anything like that, this is where I try to send students. And you can sign up for international, or you can sign up for national. You can serve 2 years. You can serve them 2 years consecutively if you'd like, but you can't serve in the same location. And so, like the Northern Ireland YAVs that I know, some went off to Arizona and New Mexico, things like that. And then very rarely are you given a 3rd year, but that's mainly the work that you're doing just can't be completed. And I only know one person in all of them that do it. So YAVs are, you'll hear me say that maybe sometimes, but I just want you guys to know that we have that for our college kid or graduates, things like that. And I think it's an awesome program that we have that not a lot of people know about. So we have 2 sacraments in the Presbyterian Church. We have communion and we have baptism. If you grew up Catholic or in another kind of faith, you have multiple ones, but these are our 2 sacraments. And what I tell the confirmands is sacraments is just sacred moments. That's kind of that shoved together. And so we have baptism and we have communion. And those can only be led by minister of word and sacrament or a ruling elder that is given permission because of the way that the church is. So those are our sacraments. Just want to make sure we know that. Reformed theology, this is a huge and massive definition depending on who you talk to, because you have conservative Reformed theology, you have liberal Reformed theology, you have like Bible-based, all this kind of things within Reformed theology. But it's basically tradition rooted in John Calvin's teachings that emphasizes God's sovereignty, grace, and the authority of Scripture. That's kind of your theological framework of who we are. The pastor nominating committee is really, really, like, that's one of your big questions, is like, what is your Reformed theology stance? And I could give you a definition that would be wildly different than Fred, that would be different than Tim, that would be different than Anna, Roger, any of the pastors in the area. Reformed theology is such this massive, massive identity, but it all has its root, but then from there, it just grows. And so all of you, everyone here has our own different definition of Reformed theology, and I don't think any of them are wrong. And so that's what's kind of cool about Reformed theology. And what I kind of tell the students is I base a lot of our theology and what we teach in what is generally called the Wesleyan quadrilateral. And so it comes out of John Wesley. And so Scripture is your main kind of driving focus. Then you have 3 other things that kind of happen within it. You have your experience, you have your reason, and you have your tradition. And so I think all 4 of those work in this really great conglomerate of how theology is talked about and reason, so that there's the experiences that God has allowed me to have that I think help shape my theology. There's also the tradition, not only the tradition of Knox, the tradition of the Pcusa, the tradition that my mom and dad taught me. All of those traditions kind of feed into who I am. And then I have my own brain. Like, I will always and wholeheartedly defend that we know love because God first loved us. That is, bar none, that is the first movement that I have within my theology that will fall into Reformed theology because it comes out of Scripture. And so some people have different viewpoints, and the spectrum is wide. And so that's what I love about Reformed theology. All right, we're also a connectional church. If you see this symbol, it means that you're in a place that you understand and that you're home, and so you have that. We do not have time to do this reverse order, but I just want to kind of highlight some things that we talked about. So here's the Matthew 25 piece. I knew I had a slide on it. It's focusing on congregational vitality, structural racism, and systemic poverty. So that's kind of what you have to have as a Matthew 25. I knew I had the slides somewhere, and so I just want to make sure that we got that. And so we have the 2022 General Assembly. We got 3 minutes. I can do this in 3 minutes. General Assembly meets in 2022, climate justice, and that was kind of the big focus there in 2022 that really took over that kind of piece. And we just haven't had a general, like, it was 2024 was our last General Assembly, and nothing really came out of it. It was in Salt Lake. Some people thought it was, but in all honesty, there wasn't much. So 2022 was a big shakeup. 2018 was a big shakeup within the releasing of the Matthew 25. In 2014, this was the big one. General Assembly approved same-sex marriage in the church. And so that's kind of when PCUSA and presbyteries had their chance of what they wanted to do. Some churches had to change their bylaws. Some churches stayed within their bylaws. And so that's kind of whenever everything went down there, 2014. In 2012, remember when we looked at the Book of Order and how it's broken down, the new form of government was implemented, streamlining the Book of Order. They took out a lot of the shalls that were in there, and they gave a lot of freedoms within the church. In 2011, the ordination standards changed to include LGBTQAI+, and as we have within our own church, the removal of the fidelity and chastity clause within that piece in 2011. So if you want to watch videos or read the minutes from that. It was pretty remarkable. I was a first-year student at Columbia while all this was going on, while these 3 things happened. And it was very, the campus was quite tense during it all. And so that's kind of what that happened there. And so we have those kind of things. Again, I'm just going to go through this, so if you want to stop me at any point, you're more than welcome. And if you want any of this, I can send it to you, email. 1983, this is the big one. Some of you may remember this. This was on CBS. I got to watch a lot of the news clips from this. This is when the reunion of the 2 major branches of Presbyterian churches came back together. It was the great, what do they call it? The Great Rejoinder or something like that. The Great Reunion. And so CBS covered it. So if you ever want to YouTube Pcusa reunion, you can find this. You can find the CBS clips. It was in Atlanta, Georgia, which was pretty neat. And the United Presbyterian Church in the USA, this is mainly the Northern Church, rejoined back with the PCUS, which was the Southern churches. And as we go behind this, you'll see kind of why they split. In the 1970s, you see kind of that growing out of the Vietnam War and different things like that, this focus on ecumenism, inclusion, and social justice in both these churches. 1967, this here, the Book of Confession is added, addressing the social issues. 1958, you have another merger that was happening, and then you have the PCUSA and the United Presbyterian Church of North America. So this was prominently in, if we go back to that map, the presbyteries that were in, if you kind of above the Mason-Dixon line that you have. 1930s, this is kind of what we're facing a little bit today. Theological tensions between modernists and fundamentalisms lead to schisms and formation of other Presbyterian denominations. So that's where you see whenever you kind of look at Presbyterians, I think we are the most divided denomination by far of any of the other main denominations. And a lot of that started there in 1930s, and you have the fundamentalist, modernist controversies, and I can go into that, but we don't have the time. 1901, this is where you see the first attempt at a reunion, but failed due to theological and cultural differences. And this all has to deal with racism, slavery, role of women, even at this point here in 1901. The Presbyterian Church was also the first to ordain a woman as a pastor, and I cannot remember her name, but there's like a holiday for some people, and so it's really, really cool, people that celebrate. Here's, I think, our last few slides. The Presbyterian Church splits over slavery and governance, and this is where in 1861, that's whenever you have that split, and you continue to see over the years they're trying, but 1983 really solidified that. 1789 is the first General Assembly out in Philadelphia, and that's kind of where we get our roots. And then you see here the big one, 1706 in Philadelphia. You see Presbyterianism starting to come, and then 1640s, Presbyterian takes root because of this guy, John Knox, which ironically, we are probably the only church that's not named after John Knox. Like, we're just Knox Road. There's John Knox Presbyterian on the Missouri side, but I don't know if Knox is from John Knox, but I love telling people that. Is like, we're Knox Presbyterian, and everyone's like, oh, original name, and you're like, kind of, because we're named after the road, not John Knox. So that's a little bit, if you need some lunch conversation, you can do that. And then John Calvin's Institutes is published in 1536, and that's the beginning of the Presbyterian kind of movement and theology. If you want to go to sleep tonight, I would highly recommend reading Institutes, and it is kind of where we are. Again, I can send you this outline, I can send you the slides if you'd like, but this is kind of as quickly as I can, which I know it took a very long time. But if you have questions, I'm happy to get coffee. I'm happy to talk more about this. Again, I'm learning more about the Presbyterian ways the longer I'm around, and so I don't think I have it all right. I don't think I have all the answers, but I think it is important for us to know who we are, and especially if the next pastor that comes is like hardcore Book of Order, like those people, they're not insufferable, but it's like, okay, let's flip it open. So I've worked with one person that was that way, and everything was like, let's go check the Book of Order. And you're like, do we really need to do that? Like, we're just talking about getting Kool-Aid for the students. People take it very seriously. And so, anyway, so that's kind of the two main things of where we are, especially within our history of who we go to, because I think it's really great to look at it in reverse than it is the other way, because you can kind of see how far we've come. So thank you guys for being here. We'll meet again on the 18th, and we'll talk a little bit more, answer questions, send me emails. I'm happy to help as much as I can. So thank you guys for being here.